One important component of your project plan will be your risk register. And if you've done any risk analysis before, you'll know it's fairly straightforward, though it is a bit detailed. And if you've never done a risk register before, then I am going to take you through the steps one by one to actually create your own risk register for your particular project. Okay? So it's going to be fairly straightforward and fairly easy today. We might even finish a little bit earlier because it's such a simple and straightforward topic. But by the end of it, you will definitely have a very clear idea of exactly what you need to do to get maximum marks for this part of your project. Okay, but before that, a story. Well, not so much a story, more a piece of psychology. I suppose the second most famous psychologist who has ever existed in the world is a guy called Carl Jung. And some of you may have heard of Carl Jung, but he's an incredibly clever guy, an incredibly clever, insightful guy into how the human psyche works, how the human personality is put together. One of his books, which is quite complicated to read, is called Archetypes of the Collective Unconsciousness. And you can tell just from the title that it's going to be a complicated read. You might say, well, what has it got to do with me? Well, he does actually describe in Archetypes of the Collective Unconsciousness some things which are stages of human life and experience which probably we all go through. In fact, the whole nature of the term archetype means something which is true probably of every single person at every single time in history. And he's picking out archetypes which characterize human nature, human life, and the way in which we all go through various learning experiences. One of those archetypes, he says, that we all meet with and face and probably experience ourselves is the archetype of the fool. Yeah, there he is. The fool. The fool is such an archetype that all of us experience the fool sometime during our lives, and it has happened throughout generation after generation after generation, right the way back to the beginning of human beings. We've had this archetype for all this time. And he says the fool is an incredibly important role that we all play. We all play it at some time or other. We're all afraid of playing that particular role because it's something which is fearful. We don't want to appear foolish. We don't want to appear the kind of people who come over as being stupid or unintelligent or not cool or something like that. And so he says, yet this is an important stage in life. It's an important stage that everyone goes through. And he says it's an essential stage because you cannot get to the stage of, now the way he puts it is, the stage of expert. He puts it that the fool is the precursor to the saviour. And you might say, what on earth does he mean by that? Well, what he means by that is simply that if you want to become an expert in a particular field, if you want to become, recognised professional computing experts, then that role is one that people look to, and they come to you and say, can you solve my problem? Can you deal with this for me? Can you sort this out? Can you write this program? Can you set up this database? And you become, if you like, according to Jung's terminology, the saviour, the person who sorts out the problems. But you cannot get to that stage, says Jung, unless you are willing to pass through the stage of the fool. Because the only way to get to the stage of the expert is by making lots of mistakes, by being stupid, by being, the first person who goes through a particular course, they don't understand anything at all. They make lots of mistakes. And some people are so petrified by that, he says, that they refuse to take any risks. And if they refuse to take any risks, they don't actually, for example, if you're in a meeting, if you're in a group, you refuse to make a contribution or say something simply because I might be thought a fool if I say something like that, and that holds you back. So you restrict yourself from taking any risks at all. And as a consequence of that, you don't learn, or you don't learn fast enough. You learn incredibly slowly, because the more risks you take, the more you actually learn more rapidly. And that's why Young says the fool is an essential role to play if you want to become an expert, if you want to become a saviour for other people who can sort out their problems for them. So risk then becomes very, very important to you for the learning process itself. And if you are one of the timid kind of people who is very introspective insofar as you are worried mostly by how people view you, then you will reduce your risk-taking down to almost zero, and you'll say nothing in meetings, and you'll take very little contribution. But the consequence of that is you'll never really get, not rapidly enough anyway, never really get to the stage of being the real expert. So if you have a question to ask in a meeting, and it really is blocking you from getting further because you don't understand something, and you're too afraid to ask the question, then you never get that knowledge, you never get to be the expert in the field. So only those people who are prepared to take risks, who are prepared to occasionally be thought a fool because they take that risk, only those people will really get to the real expert status. I thought that was something I wanted to share with you, because we're looking at risk management today, risk table, and that's a personal application of it. So this does have personal application to you. And I have a quotation from Muhammad Ali, the great boxer from last generation. He who is not courageous enough to take risks will accomplish nothing in life. There's a lot of truth in that, and really he's just echoing Carl Jung's statement. All that is by the by. My introduction to risks and the importance of risks, because personally you need to learn to take risks if you want to grow personally, but also in that you need to manage risks if you want to run a project. So let's have a look at your project. You have to plan your project. We've talked about that. You have to upload your project plan on the 13th by the time we get into 11 days' time. And what you'll have to do is these 7 steps. This is the 7 things you have to upload on the 13th. The project activities, which you get from your work breakdown structure. You've got the project team, that's your team structure, justifying all the roles, using those spidery diagrams to explain how you come to give roles to different people. How you'll select appropriate methodologies, Paul taught you about that. How you'll have to draw up a project schedule using a precedence network diagram and a Gantt chart. That's another section. That's all been done last week. And now, this week, I'm going to take you through the idea of creating a risk register. And it's going to be very simple. It's going to be very straightforward. I'm going to take you through it in a number of steps. By the end, you'll have no doubt how to do it perfectly and do it well. But, to begin with, let's just introduce the topic and let's just define our terms. Because when I talk about risk, you might think of something completely different to what I'm thinking about. So I'm going to define my terms so that we can both know we're talking about exactly the same thing. Fair enough? So, what is risk? What is likelihood as far as risk is concerned? What is impact? And what is severity? All of these have a mathematical description, or certainly severity does, and how to calculate the odds. Okay? That's by way of introduction then. That's for the first half of this lecture, and then we'll have a break, and then after we've had the break, then we'll come back and I will then take you through the 7 or 8 steps to create your own personal risk register. Okay, that's our plan for today. So, let's begin. Let me define risk for you, so you know what we're talking about. We're not talking about the kind of risks that I spoke of earlier on. They were personal risks. I'm talking now specifically about the kind of risks which may prevent your project from being completed successfully. Anything which might impact upon that. Let me define. Risk is a chance. That's it, it's a probability kind of thing. It's got numbers on it. A chance, high or low, that any hazard could cause the project to fail or fail to meet any of its objectives. Okay? It's a simple, straightforward definition. There's nothing complicated about it, but it's a chance that a hazard might intervene and cause that. I also want you to understand the difference between risk and uncertainty, because uncertainty is the inability to give a precise measure to something. And is that important? Yes, because when you're calculating your risk, it will necessarily be uncertain. In other words, the precision that you get when you're calculating your risk, and this may surprise many of you, is somewhat uncertain. As a consequence of that, no one is really going to challenge, not really, your risk register in terms of the probabilities that you put into it. We'll see how that works in a moment. So uncertainty is related to risk, but all the estimates that you make of your risk will be uncertain estimates. You must expect that to be the case. And then that will surprise you when it comes to show you how you actually make those estimates of risk, because they're highly uncertain. The estimate of risk itself is an uncertain thing. So let's see, how do you analyse risks? Well, the thing you have to bear in mind is that there are two components to risk. And the two components to risk are to do with likelihood and impact. Let me give you an example. I don't know if any of you have been mountain walking. You can get up quite high on some of the fells, maybe in the Lake District, or on some of them on roads up in Scotland. You can kind of turn around a corner and there's a big yawning chasm and a 1,000-foot drop in front of you. And you suddenly feel afraid of that. In actual fact, there's very little risk because the pathway is very clear. As long as the weather's fine, you're okay, and there's no chance of you just slipping in. It's not like you're mountain climbing, you're just up for a walk. But you feel the sudden risk. Why? Because it's not because the likelihood has gone up, but because suddenly there's an exposure here, and you can see that the impact, if something were unlikely to happen, if something would happen, it would be huge. The impact would be massive. You probably wouldn't survive. And yet the likelihood is so small. So you're assessing risks on two levels. How likely is something to take place? But also, how big is the impact likely to be if it affects me? And those two things have to go together to assess risk. The likelihood, how likely is it to occur? And how damaging would it be? And the way in which you quantify this, by which I mean put a number to it, is you use a range of different scales. There's lots of different ways. You can put a scale number to likelihood, and you can put a scale number to impact. How do you do that? Well, you can make it up. Again, I tell you there's a certain degree of uncertainty to this, but you make it up. How do you make it up? Well, you can make it up, you can say, I'm going to have for my risk, or my impact, I should say, or my likelihood, a 3-point scale. I'm going to just divide it up into events which are, for example, low, or medium, or high, highly likely to occur, or medium likelihood to occur, or low likelihood to occur. I could have a scale like that. Or I could have a simple number scale, which is usually better, a 1, 2, 3 scale. And I can just assess my likelihood or my impact on 1, 2, 3, where 1 is a low impact and 3 is a high impact. You might not think that 1 to 3 is good enough, so you might extend that to maybe a 5-point scale. You could have very low, low, medium, high, very high. Or you could have just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if you really wanted fine-grained kind of scale, you have 1 to 10. Now, the choice here, this may surprise you, is yours. You can decide how you wish to measure the impact and the likelihood according to the kind of problems that you've got. If they're very detailed, you may want a very detailed scale. If they're not very detailed, you may want a 2 or 3, a 3 or 4 point scale, whatever. You can also have a continuous scale where you go from 0 to 1, and that would be all the fractions in between, so a half and a quarter and a third and all that kind of thing. And that's an infinite number of different fractions that you have, so you can have a continuous scale. Or you can have a continuous percentage scale where 0% you put down as unlikely, so unlikely, impossible. 100%, so likely it is certain to happen. And there's a percentage in between. How do you come up with a percentage? That's an interesting question. It's interesting, and this was where it may surprise you, is you make it up. No, wait a minute, did I say make it up? Not quite make it up. You use your professional judgment and your experience of these same circumstances as to what you think is reasonable. And that is the basis of making your risk assessment. Let's call it professional judgment, let's call it experience, but ultimately you put a number on it that you personally decide based upon what you know. You put a number on likelihood, and you put a number on impact. And then when you've got those two numbers, you just multiply them together. That will give you the severity of the entire risk that you've got. So if you decide the likelihood, and of 1 to 5, say, the likelihood of this thing happening is just a 1, and the impact is going to be just a 1, that's going to be terribly low risk. It's going to be 1 times 1 equals 1. Whereas at the bottom of that chart, you can see if you think the likelihood is a 5, like almost certain to happen, and the impact is going to be really huge, that's another 5, then 5 times 5 is 25, and your risk has now been calculated. That's 25 times greater than the top one. And there are many values in between. To give you a more standardized approach, this is a typical risk matrix that people often use. This is a 1 to 5 matrix for consequences, for impact. Consequences and impact, same thing. And down the side here, you've got likelihood, and the likelihood has got 5 elements to it, things which are almost certain, or likely, possible, or unlikely, or rare. And it's got a percentage side next to that one, so it's got a percentage risk, so 100% are almost certain, rare, 0.01%, that's one way of doing it. And the consequences can range from, again, 1 to 5, be insignificant, no injuries, or as they're stated, if we're talking about those kind of physical risks, or no environmental damage, or less than £1,000 worth of damage from a company point of view, right the way through to death or major injury, toxic environmental damage, and much, much greater than $1 million worth of damage. So you can range from that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or in percentage terms, and then you can see how they multiply out. That's a multiplication table there. Almost certain and catastrophic is in the red area, well, as you might expect. And rare and insignificant is going to be in the green, low risk area. And some in the middle are going to be moderate risk or high risk. So, we're now getting to grips with it. Let me give you some examples, so you can see how you might start to calculate these yourself. What about the risk of being run over by a bus? Well, how likely would that be? Out of 5, would you say? Anyone?
2.
Sorry?
2.
2. Gosh, you must be quite daring in the way you step out in front of the car. I would put that very low at 1, maybe. I think a number of people get run over by buses are really quite low. The impact, though, would be maybe quite significant, yeah. I put that at a 4. And so I put that at severity is 1 times 4 is 4. So out of a possible 25, score of 25, I've got a score of 4 for being run over by a bus, simply because the likelihood is quite low. I mean, unless you're very, very clumsy or you're walking around with your phone all the time and, oops, hello bus, then you're going to be okay. How about being run over by a child on a bicycle? Well, that's maybe more likely, possibly. I scale that one at, because kids don't always know where they're going. I have occasionally been run into by a kid on a bike, and but fortunately the impact was very low, didn't really do any damage, you can just sort of steady them and everything's okay. And so I've got a lowish likelihood, I've got a very low impact rate, and severity is 2 times 1 is 2. That's not the case though, apparently, if you're on one of these electric scooters. Anyone got one of these electric scooters? They're pretty powerful machines. I saw one in the shop the other day. It did 43 miles an hour. I thought, gosh, that's really fast. And I read that the first death from an electric scooter hitting a pedestrian occurred someone last week, I think it was. I think a 77-year-old woman got hit with this electric scooter. Maybe doing 43 miles an hour, I don't know, but wow, gosh, killed her. So this is a slightly higher risk somewhat for electric scooters. How about the thrill of the Poulton's Park, big ride, you know, that kind of thing? What would you rate the likelihood of an accident occurring here? Anyone? 1. Did I hear a 1? Yeah, yes. Because, you know, they're checked regularly. And, you know, you go on these things because you don't expect them to happen. Occasionally it happens. Occasionally you do hear something coming off the rails or a coach flying off. But it's incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. So I would rate that as a 1 as far as likelihood was concerned. But what would you rate the impact? If you did come off? 5, yeah, that's fair enough. That's exactly what I rated it as. So we've got severity 1 times is 1 times 5 equals 5. So incredibly low likelihood, incredibly high risk impact, but multiplying together is quite a low score. Okay, it's not too bad. That's because it's fair. Which means that's why you're probably quite happy to go on to Poulton's Park or Alton Towers or somewhere like that and go on one of these rides. So you have to queue up for hours and hours these days, it seems to me. What about a more risky endeavour? What about rock climbing? That looks risky, but one of the things that rock climbers do is they try to ensure that the likelihood of any accident is reasonably low. How do they do that? They attach themselves with ropes. So because they attach themselves with ropes, and they're probably attached to other climbers too, you've got, I would say, a lowish likelihood for that, maybe a 2 for that one. Not quite a 1 because it's still a risky pursuit in you. But being quite high up like that, again, the severity is going to be, incredibly high. If you fall down that rock face, you will probably not survive. Yeah. So there's a severity factor of 2 times 5 equals about 10. What about more risk? Here's people engaged in alpine sports of different kinds, of which there is no rope, and which people like to take risks. I mean, you learn a lot by taking risks, and there's danger involved in some of these things. I would say that's fairly dangerous. Snowboarding or paragliding down things. People who do paraglide down do crash into mountain sides, and I would say that the likelihood here is medium. But of course that depends on the skill of the individual. There are some people who are so skillful, they've been doing it for years and years and years, that the likelihood is actually lower for them. Whereas there are some people who are complete amateurs, maybe never done it before, think I'll paraglide off a mountain, and maybe are not that experienced. So their likelihood may well go up. However, in each case, the impact would stay the same, rather high. So there we are, that's a 5. So the severity has now gone up to 15 for this one. One more. This, what do you think of the most dangerous sport? Anybody? I wouldn't like to play sport with you. It's not a sport I would consider a sport. It doesn't take place in the Olympics, I don't think. But anybody got another one?
Wheelchair rugby.
What's that?
Wheelchair rugby, is that meant to be?
Wheelchair rugby, is that dangerous?
I don't know, I feel like it would be.
Well, it probably could be. It could well be. Tell me whether you think this one is more dangerous than wheelchair rugby or not. This is the one I thought was probably the worst. Freestyle climbing. Yeah. Very high up. Yeah. No ropes. And yeah, on your own. People do that? Yeah. Yeah, there they are. Come all the way from the bottom down there by just finding handholds. All the way up steep cliffs. Likelihood? Well, I would have thought, you might say to me, shouldn't that be really on 5 for the likelihood? No, I don't think so. I mean, these are experienced climbers, okay? There are a lot of falls on these free climbers, and if you do fall, the severity is massive, yeah? But, you know, I put that down as there's more likelihood of falling on that than there is on a roped climb. But then again, you can moderate that fall down a bit from someone who's got a lot of experience. So if you want to go and do free climbing, you tend to go up with someone who's very experienced the first few times, and then they guide you through where all the handholds are and everything is like that. But of course, it's not for everyone. Sometimes the risk is just too great. One of the things which has really bothered society this last few years, of course, happens to be COVID, of which risk assessments have been done massively. And I think if you're doing a project of some sort, certainly in the last couple of years, you'd have to take the risk of something like a disease attacking you quite seriously. I was pleasantly surprised to see that things are not quite as bad as they used to be. I think when COVID first appeared, it used to be pretty a serious kind of strain, but now with various other strains, it's hardly impactful anymore than the flu, it seems to me anyway. The likelihood of getting COVID, I said 4, but you know what? I'd probably rise that up to 5 because the thing is endemic, and it's almost impossible now to find anyone who hasn't had it at some time, if not had it once or twice or even 3 times, you know? So the likelihood is very high. The impact, though, to be quite frank, is very low. Though it does depend upon your age. So people your age are different in terms of risk than people my age. So, for example, older adults, they worked out finally after a couple of years or so that the overall impact, I'm talking about a serious impact here of death, that impact is actually very low, it's 0.3%. So, in other words, 99.7% of people who contract COVID, no problem. Okay? The average age of death with COVID is 82, and nearly everyone who dies from it tends to be this comorbidity thing. So for an ordinary healthy person, even at my age, it's about 0.3%. So the severity, let's say 80 times 0.3 is about 0.24, which is a percentage, which is very low. We don't really need to worry about that. Someone your age, well, you even have less worry about it than I do. Likelihood is still about high, 80% should get it, if not more than that. The impact, I mean the death impact, is astonishingly low for someone who's healthy in their 20s. And, you know, people who are have got virtually 0 chance of dying. I think 1 in a couple of million, I think, is the opportunity for people who die at your age from that. So the severity then becomes incredibly low. So you can do a risk analysis on almost anything, including COVID. And many companies have done that already because, after all, their projects may depend upon whether their workforce gets ill or not. So that would be an element to include. All right, I've promised you a step-by-step instruction manual on how to create your own risk register for your own project. Now, if you follow these instructions exactly as I give them to you, you will score maximum marks for this section of the upload. It's like well worthwhile keeping an eye on what's going on here. So the plan here now is to, having talked about risk in general, you've got a good idea what it means and how to calculate it. Let's go through the steps of how to actually create a risk register. So I've got 5 steps. 5 straightforward, simple, easy things for you to do. Number 1, you have to identify your risks. Identify the threats. I'm going to take you through the main ways in which you do that. Fairly straightforward, to put your objectives at risk. And then you analyse the risk. Well, we still have to do that, so that'll be quite quick and easy to do. Then you have to prioritise the risk. That's very easy to do as well, but many people forget to do that and lose a mark or two because they didn't prioritise. And then you have to manage the risk and then take action, which deals with avoidance and contingency. We'll talk about that. And finally, you have to monitor the risk. So it's all going to be straightforward, and I don't think it's going to take terribly long. It may just take us half an hour to get through this, but you will leave knowing exactly what you have to do. So that's the benefit for this. So let's identify the risks first of all. That's probably the hardest part of this whole process, is identifying what the risks are. How do you do it? Well, I'm going to give you 2 methods to identify the risks. Number 1 is the brainstorming session using your whole team. Okay? Get your whole team together, sit around with cups of coffee or whatever, and then brainstorm. Now, you probably heard the term, but I just want to make it clear as to what brainstorming is, because brainstorming is where you separate 2 functions of your thinking into 2 separate compartments and then do one and then the other one afterwards. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the creative part of your mind, which can produce all kinds of ideas, and the judgmental part of your mind, which says, that's good, that's not so good, that's okay, that's not okay. Sometimes the judgmental part of your mind will inhibit you from taking risks, from being creative, from doing things, from going out on a ledge. Is that wise? Is that sensible? The judgmental part keeps you in check and keeps you in control. All right? Now, when you do brainstorming, you have to set aside the judgmental part, make no judgments as to whether something is good or bad, right or wrong, appropriate, inappropriate. Leave that to one side and try to separate the judgmental part, the part which will criticize you if you do something wrong. Separate that out, try and ignore it, try and leave it to one side. And then on the creative side, come up with as many ideas as you possibly can. Often round a table, and just put them down. Sometimes it's quite useful to have a post-it set of notes. If I do an exercise, I do it that way. Put post-it notes in, and people just write things down, put them in the middle of the table, write something down. And you don't stop to think, is that really going to be good enough? You just write down what comes into your head. That's the creative element. You don't criticize it, you don't stop it, you don't block it. You put everything down there, boom, 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 one after the other, until everybody gathers together all their ideas in an uncritical way. When that first stage is over and done with, then you come back to your judgmental side and think, okay, now let's put our judgmental cap on and let's look at each of these things and see if they really stand up. And then you go through each one and then sort them out and think, that's no good, that's no good. Well, that could be good if we change it, but it's over here. And you sort out your risks that way. But by separating out those 2 parts of your thinking, you allow the creative side to come up with all kinds of ideas. Some of which are clever, some of which are not so clever, some of which are a bit stupid, but nevertheless, they're all on the table, ready to be assessed later. So that's one way of doing it. Use a whole team approach. One person can't come up with the risks. not a good idea to say, okay, Fred, you do the risk plan, that's it. And then Fred goes off and works it out for himself. Well, he may not know what your bits and pieces are about or what you think is risky. So he's got to get everything that you put together so that all of those risks come together. So you need a whole team approach. You call a risk identification meeting just for that, and you give half an hour to it, and then you list a whole pile of things by pooling your knowledge. That's method number one. There is a method number two. It's a more systematic method, and it's the method of using our risk checklist. Now, there are different risk checklists for different industries. If you're a pilot, a commercial airline pilot driving an Airbus or a 747, then you've got a checklist of risks and things which you would look at. But that's quite different from what you might look at, because you're software engineers or you're creating something of that nature. And then you need to have a checklist which will be suitable for your industry. And are there such things? Well, I've put something together very quickly for you to give you an idea of how you view your checklist. And then you can go through the checklist one by one. And look at things and think, is that in scope? Is that out of scope? Is that applicable? Is that not applicable? Then you give you some ideas. So there are 6 areas you need to look at when you're doing a general software development risk. Number one, probably the biggest one, people problems. Okay, are there any risks with people? You bet it. It's probably the biggest area of risk, really. Then there's scheduling and budget issues, technology and tools issues, requirements and development issues, client issues, and maybe some external factors too. Let me just give you an idea of how they work. So people issues. What kind of people issues have you got? Well, you probably already hit some people issues already. Why is that person who never turns up, never answering the emails, And how can we get in contact with them? I've sent 3 emails this week, not a single reply, People issues. What risk is that? Loss or absence of staff. Wrong abilities or skill set. Look, we need someone to do the forensic bit, and we haven't got anyone to do that bit. What are we going to do? Another risk. That might impact you. Inefficient staff. I said I'd bring that stuff in next week, but, had a problem. So I'll do it next week, the week after. Is that all right? Staff not working to full potential. Well, just give me a little bit. I'm not that fussed about. I've got plenty on this week. Team mix. Does the team gel properly? Poor project management skills. Have you got a good coordinator? Poor hire management. Well, not in your case, I suppose. So that's the people issues. Then you've got scheduling and budget issues. Is your scope too big? Do you need to pull it down? Is the task size, the duration underestimated? Is there things missing from the schedule which should be on there? Costs underestimated. You haven't got any costs, so you're okay with that. And are there any unseen needs that you haven't got resources that you're going to need? Then there's the technology and tools. Have we got the right programs or platforms that we're going to be using for this? Are we familiar with them? Well, we need this platform to use to create this mobile app, but, I've never used it. No, I've never used it either. Well, who's going to take it on then? Well, I'm not very good at learning new things. You do it. Oh, okay. So, straining the current technology, pushing the boundaries because it doesn't quite do what you need it to do, and therefore things get missed out. And the use of unsuitable tools, wrong methodologies, wrong modelling technique, whatever it may be. So you can't actually do the job properly. What's the risk of that? Is that a risk for you? May or may not be. And there's risks with requirements. Poorly understood. Didn't properly communicate with people. Changes to the requirements. This is if you've got a client that keeps changing their mind and they give you the requirements. Or your project is evolving and developing, people keep adding things to it. And gosh, can we keep up with all of that? Over-specifying, too much detail. That could be a problem issue. Developing the wrong functionality, wrong interface, poor practice. All of those could be risks which you might want to identify. Or they may not be risks that you don't want to identify. Up to you. Whatever you think is appropriate for your project. Every project is different. Client issues. Well, you haven't really got a client, but just for the sake of completeness, I mentioned that, there may be changes to the business environment, the objectives. Clients are a big nuisance because they're often changing their minds about things. Halfway through, they'll say we don't actually want half of what you've done. Tough. And so-called external factors. So what does that include? Well, there may be bought-in components and tools which don't work, don't function, break down, you need to get them serviced by someone else to come and do that. Subcontracted work, you probably haven't got subcontractors, so don't worry about that. Loss of facilities or access to machines or premises, those kind of things can be a problem if you don't make enough income, no cash flow, get thrown out of your office kind of thing, or there may be power cuts, weather, social unrest, or even COVID-19, or maybe even COVID 2023, who knows? Yeah.
So you said we don't have subcontractors. Are we allowed to subcontract people out?
Well, only if the subcontractors get the mark that you wanted. Does that make fair? If they do the work, they get the mark? But you wouldn't get the mark then, of course. So, let's start off with the risk register. Green item. A big table, I recommend using something like Excel, which is good for putting lists down. If you prefer, you can use a table in Word, if you're happy with that, or some other program which you know is okay. And draw out a table with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. Entitle it Risk Register, and start listing the risks numbers from 1 to 20, 30, whatever it may be that you identify. And then start identifying the risks in the second column there. Identifying risk. Development tools may have bugs and their maintenance takes up 80% of development time. Possibly. Several clients with apparently conflicting requirements. Changing the requirements due to forthcoming upgrade of communication facilities. These are not your risks, of course. You wouldn't have any of those, so I wouldn't copy them. But they're indicative of the kind of a software development team, the kind of risks they may have. You identify them. One you could add down there, of course, would be your whole workforce gets struck down by COVID-19. Not so likely these days, but it certainly was maybe a year ago. And who knows what the latest bird flu, avian problem, monkeypox might come along and strike us all down in some way or other. But there you go. There's risks for almost everything in life. So, we've now started our table. We've now got our risk register. We've got 2 columns filled in. The first one dead easy with just numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the next one, the identified risks which you have got together round your table using your brainstorming session and using your checklists. Right? So you've done that, you've got a list. You maybe have 20, how many risks should we identify? Well, the best way of answering that for your interest would be to say that last year, some projects which scored quite low, like 50%, usually identified around about 5 to 10 risks. Projects which managed to do a little bit more, usually identified, if they scored about 65% maybe, they managed to have maybe between 10 and 20 risks. Some projects, they managed to identify well over 20, maybe 30 risks, and there was a correlation that those tended to get more marks. Now, I don't want you to go away with the idea that the more risks you put down, the more marks you get, as if it's like 1 mark for each risk. It's not like that. It's just that, how do I put it? The more conscientious you are at doing something, like the risk table, and the more detail you put in, it shows that you're conscientious on other things too. And the more conscientious you do and the more details you put into pretty well everything. And so those tended to be how the marks played out, roughly speaking. Not always, but that's roughly how it came. So now you have to analyse your risks. You identified them, and you come back on the table here, and you Decide whether you're going to have a 1 to 5 system, 1 to 10 system, a continuous system, whatever you may want to do, you choose. Whatever you think is appropriate. That's 1 to 5 is a standard way of doing it. 1 to 5 likelihood, 1 to 5 consequences. And list them from 1 to 5 and then multiply them out in terms of numbers. And that will give you the thing. So you go through each of your risks on your table and you allocate a number. So what have we got here? Development tools have got bugs that they take time to deal with. Let's say that's a 2 out of 5. And the impact could be quite severe, so it's a 4. And so on. We go through with the COVID virus affects the workforce. That's a likelihood of 5 I put down. And an impact of 5 maybe if everyone gets knocked out. So now you've started to use your professional judgment, and using your professional judgment, you have worked out the values of the likelihood of each of your risks, and also the severity comes in place, or the impact of each one. Now don't forget, you'll say to me, how do I know I've got the right numbers for it? Remember that word uncertainty at the beginning? Creating a risk table is an uncertain process. You can only go on your best judgment. Trust your judgment, use your common sense, use your experience, use whatever background you have in thinking things through, and put in the number which seems the most accurate and correct to you. I don't think it'll be challenged unless it's really wacky and way off. So your best judgment will be good enough. Although I have to say that as you go through life, your best judgment will get better and better and better as you move from that role of fool to the role of expert. And then these numbers become more accurate and more reliable, therefore. But it doesn't stop you from starting. Okay, so we've worked out the likelihood, we've worked out the impact. Now we just have to prioritize. I said almost every year there are some marks lost for missing this step out. This is probably, out of all those steps, the easiest one to do. And yet people forget to do it and they just miss out a mark or two simply for that. Prioritising the risks, what does it mean? Well, you've seen the table. 1 times 1 is 1, 5 times 5 is 5, everything is in the middle. Multiply it all out and get yourself a severity score. Once you've got your severity score, and here it is here, 2 times 4 is 8, 3 times 4 is 12. Yeah, okay, people put the severity score in, I'm not saying they don't do that, but what they miss out is rearranging the table so that it's in proper priority order. You want to put the biggest risk at the top, and then the next biggest risk, next one down, and so on. So the table is ordered in a way so the biggest risks are clearly first in your line of organising. So that one's got to go up to the top, that one's got to go down to 3rd place, and that one's got to go down to the last place, and then you just have to move them round, which isn't too hard on a spreadsheet, or even in a Word process document, and now you have prioritised your risks. Very easy, very straightforward. But if you don't do it, you lose a couple of marks. So, not much point in missing that out. Cool. Where are we? This is probably the hardest bit to do and takes the most work in setting up your risk register. You have to manage the risks. How do you manage risk? There's 2 words which I want you to memorize or understand if you haven't come across these words before. The first word is mitigation, and the second word is contingency. If you don't know those 2 words, I'd like you to commit them to memory and understand what they mean. Mitigation and contingency. Mitigation, how do you stop something from happening? How do you mitigate it? How do you stop it from happening? How do you prevent it from taking place? And so mitigation is all about actions which you do now before the event actually occurs. What are you going to do to limit the possibility of that risk taking place? Yeah? So, for example, you might say, I don't want the workforce going off with COVID, so to mitigate it, let's say they all have to wear masks and they all have to have a vaccination. That would be possible mitigation, okay, provided the science is there, which it may not be. So you've got mitigation. What do we do now to avoid the risk or reduce the likelihood of it occurring, and maybe even reduce the impact when it occurs? That's the first thing, mitigation. Remember the word. And then you've got contingency, is what happens afterwards. Contingency is what do you do after it's happened? What is the contingency plan? That is, if it happens, what do we now do? Well, I want you to think that through before it even happens. That's the nature of managing risk here. Dealing with it. It's an action for the future if the thing actually takes place. Plan future action to have ready in your pocket, so to speak, if you know this thing actually happens and takes place. What do you do then? So, you know, if a member of your workforce catches some horrible illness and disease like COVID, you might say, well, the contingency will be we send them away and they're isolated for 10 days. That might be a contingency. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Mitigation, contingency, remember the difference between the two. Use the words technically. And then there may be cost. How do you, this is really not for you because you're not in your project going to be using costs, but just in terms of, you can spend a lot of money in mitigation, you can spend a lot of money in contingency plans as well, and yet you could spend £1 million trying to prevent something which is only going to save you £1,000 at the end of the day. That wouldn't be worth it. So you just have to make sure that the cost of the mitigation or the contingency is actually less than the cost of what would occur if it happened. A lot of businesses make that mistake. They'll spend £10,000 trying to prevent something which would only cost them £1,000 if it occurred. Doesn't make any sense. So we now have two other columns here. One is your mitigation or your avoidance and actions for now, and then you've got your contingency, which is actions for the future. And this is where it takes a little bit more skill to do something specific to make your table work properly. So, for example, what have we got? Several clients with apparently conflicting requirements. Number 3, with a risk score of 12 there, or organise a meeting with all the clients to finalise a unified set of requirements before the project starts. That's a simple thing that you can do in order to mitigate the risk. You know, if you've got a project and it's got 2 or 3 people who are, you go and talk to this one and they say, oh yes, we'd like this done, this done. Thank you, make a note. This one, well actually we don't want that, we actually want this instead. Oh, okay. And then you go and talk to this one. No, we don't want any of that. And you've got conflicting requirements from different people because they're talking different times. What mitigating approach would you take? Simple. Come this way, come this way, come this way, we'll sit down. All right, tell us what the requirements are. All 3 in the same room, let them argue it out in front of you until they come to a common conclusion. And so you have this kind of organised meetings with all the clients together to finalise it. So there are steps that you can take to manage simple kind of issues. That's just one of 1,000 things that you can do. Okay, so think those through. And the contingency. What you will do if it doesn't, if you don't stop it from happening, if it does actually happen. Write down what your plans are for the future. Now, it's that final column which shows that you're planning properly, because it means that you're not taken by surprise. When something occurs, you don't want to be saying, oh, what are we going to do now then? No. To plan properly, you will have already thought that through. And so the point of having a risk management plan is to think, okay, what will we do? Let's put that down, and then when that thing actually happens, someone just pulls the plan out and says, that's what we do, and then give that to act on so on. Now you can see that becomes very, very important when you've got maybe 357 risks on a very, very big project, and people can't remember what all the answers are going to be, but they're all done by different people. But having got them all together and written them down, you can go and look them up and see what it's like. That's what happens, for example, you're in a jumbo jet of some kind, and suddenly the engine blows on the port wing, and you think, what do we do now? What do? And they pull down the manual and look through the risks. Yeah, actually they do that. And right, check this thing first, check that thing first, check this, check this, check this. And so they've got their contingency plans already worked out. You need to be the same. If you can do that, then you'll get good marks for this section. I put some funny ones in for COVID. Not sure how valuable those are. Latest news on the COVID is that much of these mitigations don't actually work and never did. Interesting Cochrane review out on the 20th of January showing that masks don't actually function. And that's the main Cochrane review, which is like the gold standard of standards. So we're learning all the time. So that's an important thing to remember, that your risk plan may change as time goes on, as new information comes into play. And so we need to monitor the risks, the final step. Okay. Oh, we're doing quite well for time, aren't we? We're going to finish early. Monitoring the risks then. So, why do you monitor risks and how do you monitor them? Well, by monitoring them, what it means is that you, at your meetings, at your team meetings, maybe once a month, possibly, once every 2 or 3 weeks, you pull out the risk register plan and you go through it. Dum. Does this still apply? Does that still apply? Does that still apply? Because why? Why do you monitor risks? Because risks can, as the project proceeds, they can become more likely or they can become less likely. They can become more impactful or they can become less impactful. So risks change as the project goes through. Because they change, you need to keep an eye on them. Some risks might disappear entirely. Once you've passed a milestone, that risk no longer applies. You can take it off. New risks may emerge, though, at a different time. So you've got to start putting things into your risk plan afterwards. All right? So you monitor the results of the actions that you've taken. Have they had the desired effect? And have they had any unexpected effects? Yeah.
I was just wondering, you said if a risk is to disappear altogether, that you should remove it. If it's removed, for the point of the assignment, it may appear that we never...
Technical removal.
By technical removal.
It stays on the form, sorry. But at the end, as I'll show you, there's a little column which says, this is now completed, or this is closed. Okay. Removed in that sense.
Yeah.
Quite right there, that's it done. So, you then monitor them in this way. How do you do that? Well, and you see I added one extra column to our risk management plan, our risk register. So you've got your number, the risk itself, the likelihood, the impact, the severity, ordered in the right order. Oh, that's the wrong way around. 3 and 2 should be the other way around there. I'd lose a mark for that. And then avoidance and containment, contingency, and then status. Status, the final thing. And status is important to get your full marks, because status means that you've actually reviewed your risk register at meetings. Because if you don't review it at meetings, there'll be nothing to add into the status column, because there's no decisions made about it. You just have it done and finished and nothing's added. So this is what's going on. So as you go through, let's take the top one, COVID. As of the 20th of February, 5 people were infected in the workforce. Projections are 1 more by the end of the month. likelihood that one more is going to be affected by the dreaded COVID. And status on the other ones, you read through them, no bugs have been identified. That's great. Client meetings are consistent approach, or have produced a consistent approach. And then requirements, no change in requirements so far. And you put dates on those to see when you reviewed them. And as I say, some of them may say, this is now closed, risk ended, because you've passed a certain milestone. So a status update will show me and anyone else that you're on top of the risk mechanism. If, for example, you just create a risk register, it's quite possible, most groups probably do this. They create a risk register because they know they've got to do it to get some marks. They do that, and then they put it away, and let's forget about that. We don't need to bother that anymore, that's fine. If you do that, there won't be much in the right-hand column, and if there's not much in the right-hand column, you won't get full marks for that section. I need to see that you are monitoring the risks and adding to them, or subtracting from them, leaving them in place, of course, as you know, so that we can actually see that they're properly being used. No point in having it if you're not going to use it. This is how you use it, by monitoring it. I suppose as we get to the end, and I'm coming to the end of my slides now, so we'll be finishing definitely earlier than normal, is we evaluate the risks at the end of the project. So when you get to the end, there's an evaluation section. We'll talk about evaluation in a future lecture. But as far as you're concerned, evaluation is part of looking at the risk plan. Did we learn from our experience? Did we get the mitigations right? Did we get the contingencies right? Is there anything we would change? Is there anything to learn from our risk plan that we would do differently? Now that's important. And the reason why it's important, I told you that risk plans are a matter of judgment, personal judgment. How do you gain good quality judgment skills? By learning from mistakes. How does the fool become the expert? By learning from mistakes and not being afraid, therefore, of mistakes. In fact, that brings me back to the beginning, really. The lesson for us personally in all of this is about learning from mistakes. And I suppose that if I wanted to leave you with one thought, it's not so much about the risk plan that you've got to draw up, but your own personal risks in life, which I think you might find important, because every one of us faces this kind of role. And our natural instinct is to avoid risk, because they can be risky, they can be a bit awkward and difficult, and if we do something wrong, or get something wrong, more than anything else, we can look really stupid in front of our friends, or our peers, or our team. So what I want you to take away from this is this fact that the importance of what Carl Jung said, which is that if you're so afraid of taking risks yourself that you back off, you'll never actually become the expert that you're meant to be. And not being afraid of going through this stage of being a fool, not being afraid of that to the extent that it inhibits you, that's something which will actually benefit you if you embrace that. And that means taking on risky things that you think it could fall over, and I could fall flat on my face here, and it might go wrong. But you know, even if it does, even if you do fall flat on your face, you learn something incredibly valuable from that, which improves you as a person, so that next time around, you're more experienced. And being able to accept that you've got to go through the role of the fool, even though it's a bit painful at times, is like accepting the fact that I can be a novice. And I don't mind seeming to be a novice. I don't mind seeming to ask stupid questions or doing things which just look a bit daft at times, because I know that I'm actually on a track and I'm on a journey which is going to take me to being an expert in what I do. well, you're all on that track and all that journey, which is why you're doing a bachelor's in computing science, because by the end of it, you're all going to be experts. But you've got to go through this stage, so don't worry about it too much on the way. What did I say there? Life's about taking risks. If you win, you're happy, and if you lose, you'll be wise. Same with projects in many ways too. Don't worry if your risks are quite high and things don't always work out, as long as you can analyse them and learn from them. Don't forget, life is full of ups and downs, and the only people who don't have ups and downs in life, well, it's probably even worse. Okay. So, we finish at that point, and I will hopefully see you not next week. Oh, thank you.